In a quiet, silent night where the moon rises majestically in the sky, an ancient shadow stretches over the history of humanity. Consider for a moment. Have you ever wondered what might truly be hidden between the lines of the Holy Scriptures? What secrets are concealed in the text fragments that have been preserved throughout millennia? It is in the heart of this search that the Nephilim emerge, enigmatic beings mentioned in Genesis who instill a palpable disquiet. Imagine a powerful scene. Thousands of years ago, a civilization is being built, raising monuments that defy human understanding. Among them, the pyramids of Egypt, majestic and imposing, guard secrets that seem to float in the air. However, a question persists, an inquiry that echoes in the minds of scholars and the curious. Who genuinely helped build these colossal structures? Were the ancient Egyptians solely responsible, or was there an influence from beings who should not exist? This question has reverberated for centuries, and if we look closer, we find intriguing references in the pages of the Bible. Genesis 6:4 mentions the sons of God and the daughters of men, an allusion to beings who walked among us, resulting in the generation of the Nephilim, the giants. They are described as mighty men, men of great fame and renown, but the implications of their existence cast a shadow over the human narrative. Why is this mention so significant? What makes those who seek the truth about the origin of the Nephilim feel so challenged and intrigued? The answer may not be simple, but it is the question that leads us to dark and fascinating places. Something pulses beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. If you look closely, you will see that the story of the Nephilim is not just an old anecdote, but a reflection of human fears and longings. What do these giants represent? Are they mere myths, or a memory of a past that refuses to be forgotten? Stories about these beings have been told in different cultures around the world, as if a secret knowledge were shared by civilizations that never physically met. So why do academic and religious authorities prefer to maintain silence about these accounts? What are they afraid we might discover? These questions persist unanswered, but they instigate a deeper inquiry. What is the truth? If you are drawn to mysteries and ready to explore these questions, we invite you to subscribe to our channel, where we will delve into every aspect of the Nephilim narrative, revealing details that many prefer to ignore. Give this video a like so we can continue to bring to light stories that challenge common understanding, and share your opinions in the comments. We want to know what you think about these extraordinary beings. In this documentary, we will not merely be narrating a story. We will be together on a journey that spans millennia, exploring not only what ancient texts say, but also examining the implications of their messages. History is full of enigmas that deserve to be explored, and the journey begins here at the intersection between faith, history, and archaeology. As we consider these concepts, we must allow ourselves to pause for a moment and reflect on the immensity of this mystery. What could have happened in ancient times that led such figures to be remembered? What kind of interaction between the human and the divine could have generated such grandiose creations? Every answer leads us to more questions, and the lines between reality and legend begin to blur. Now, as you settle in and prepare to immerse yourself in this investigation, allow yourself to relax. Feel the weight of the world dissipate as you focus on this mystery. With every breath, imagine yourself closer to the truth hidden behind the Nephilim. Each inhalation brings a new piece of this puzzle, and each exhalation takes away the distractions of the everyday. And so, with this atmosphere charged with expectation, we delve into history, a place where reality intertwines with the unknown, where what we know might be just the tip of the iceberg. We will explore together the marks left by those who, possibly, walked among us, defying logic and reason. In the first layer of this mystery, we are about to explore not only the texts that mention the Nephilim, but also the repercussions of their mere existence. What does it mean to be a Nephilim? In what contexts were they mentioned? And what is the impact of this on the biblical narrative and the modern understanding of history? When we look at Genesis 6:4, images emerge of a past where the sacred mingled with the earthly, and the very definition of humanity was at stake. Looking back, we are invited to question the truths we have always taken for granted, encouraged to open our minds to new perspectives and possibilities. The narrative is ancient, but it still resonates with an unsettling relevance. So prepare yourself, because the story of the Nephilim is just beginning. What were they truly, and what role did they play in the creation of our world? We will explore these narratives together, both within and outside the sacred text, in search of the truth that might be hidden beneath centuries of interpretation and silence. The journey has just started, and with every step, we are closer to uncovering the secrets that shaped humanity. Throughout the centuries, the figure of the Nephilim has generated a fascination that goes far beyond what the pages of the Bible can reveal. The implications of their existence not only reverberate in oral traditions, but also intertwine with the history of humanity. Thus, as we delve into the narrative of Genesis 6:4, we begin to glimpse a broader panorama where myths and realities meet in a mystical dance, creating a rich and complex tapestry. What truly distinguishes the Nephilim is the combination of abilities and characteristics attributed to them, described as giants, men of renown eye. Their presence on earth was perceived as a mixture of admiration and fear. Ancient traditions often portray them as beings who possessed supernatural power, capable of influencing events and shaping the destiny of civilizations. This enigmatic aspect prompts reflection. What would be the impact of such beings on a society seeking to understand its own origin? Beyond the scriptures, historical records from different cultures echo the narrative of the Nephilim. The ancient Sumerians, for instance, spoke of divine beings who descended from the stars, bringing unusual knowledge and skills to humans. Clay tablets found in excavations in Mesopotamia reveal stories of entities crossing the sky, delivering secrets of metallurgy, agriculture, and astronomy. Could it be possible that these legends, so similar to each other, are fragments of a greater truth, a connection between civilizations that transcends time? As we delve deeper into the narratives, a fundamental question arises. What truly happened in antiquity? Were the interactions between humans and beings from another dimension genuinely so profound as to produce visible consequences in our history? The Nephilim, with their unique abilities and characteristics, may have influenced not only the construction of monumental structures, but also the beliefs that shaped entire societies. Imagine for a moment the scene of an ancient ritual where priests invoked the gods seeking guidance. These rituals were not mere formalities. They were attempts to establish a connection with entities that, according to popular belief, had the power to alter the course of human life. The Nephilim, as children of divine beings, may have been seen as intermediaries between the human and the divine, and their actions and decisions could have been considered sacred. What would happen if this connection became a reality? Could we be facing a reality where divine intervention shaped history more directly than we imagine? Within this context, the narrative of Genesis 6:4 becomes a window into a world of possibilities. The description of the Nephilim as the fallen suggests a fall that is not only physical but also spiritual. This fall can be interpreted as the loss of an ancient wisdom, where the interaction between the human and the divine lost its harmony. What happened to the Nephilim after that fall? Would they have become mere myths, or do their essences still permeate the world in ways we cannot fully comprehend? Archaeological revelations over the years have brought to light artifacts that, at first glance, seem to defy conventional explanations. Megalithic structures, such as those found in Baalbek in Lebanon, raise new questions about the construction capacity of antiquity. Could these monuments be evidence of a civilization that had forgotten its own potential? Or are they vestiges of an external influence, perhaps even from beings who crossed the skies? However, the narrative does not end here. As we delve deeper into the history of the Nephilim, we begin to notice a resistance from academic and religious institutions to openly discuss these issues. What could justify this silence? Is it the fear that the truth will come to light? Or perhaps the understanding that by exploring these mysteries, we are approaching truths that can challenge not only official history, but also the very essence of faith? The questions persist, remaining like shadows that extend over our search for answers. What is hidden between the lines of the scriptures? What forgotten truths are waiting to be revealed? The journey so far is only the beginning, a prelude to an investigation that promises to take us to unknown places. So, as you settle in and prepare to continue this exploration, allow yourself to feel the energy that permeates this mystery. Every deep breath can bring new perceptions to light, new understandings about what it truly means to be human in a world where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural are often nebulous. What you discover may be more than a simple story. It may be a revelation about the very nature of existence. As we move forward, prepare to explore not only the figures of the Nephilim, but also the implications their existence may have on our understanding of humanity. The next step will take us deeper into the ancient texts, where truths and myths intertwine, and to where the answers may be more surprising than you imagine. Be ready to open your mind and heart, for the journey is just beginning. The echoes of a forgotten age reverberate in the stones of ancient temples where shadows dance under the moonlight. As we follow the narrative of the Nephilim, a new layer of complexity emerges. The relationship between these beings and the great monuments that bear witness to time. The question of how seemingly primitive civilizations managed to erect such immense and complex structures is not merely academic. It is a search for answers that touches the roots of our very existence. And as we explore these answers, a new character insinuates himself into the story, the figure of the architect. This archetype, which arises in the narratives of various cultures, represents the conjunction between the human and the divine. Could it be possible that the Nephilim, in their essence, were the archetypes of such architects? Were they responsible for the construction techniques that still intrigue us today? Throughout history, accounts of divine architects who descended from the heavens to guide humanity in the construction of sacred monuments have been common. From the Egyptian gods to the Mesopotamian deities, there is a subtle line that connects these accounts with the figure of the Nephilim. The temples of Baalbek, with their monumental columns and giant stones, are not only a marvel of engineering, but also a testament to an ancient wisdom that seems to have been lost to time. The stories circulating around this sacred place speak of a knowledge that went beyond what humanity could understand. The clay tablets of Mesopotamia, which record the construction of cities, frequently mention the help of celestial beings. Were the Nephilim those beings, or merely a reflection of human aspirations in search of something greater? As the layers of this story unfold, a new question arises. What would it have taken for an ancient civilization, supposedly without the technologies we possess today, to erect such structures? This dilemma is not just technical but philosophical. The implication that beings with supernatural abilities may have participated in the construction of these marvels opens up a range of possibilities that challenge the conventional understanding of time and space. Archaeological revelations, such as the discovery of tools that defy logical explanations, provoke a confrontation with academic orthodoxy. Tool marks found on the stones of Baalbek, for example, suggest a type of knowledge and technology that does not fit into what we know about the era. This leads us to question, are the stories of the Nephilim mere fables, or is there a substratum of truth that resonates across the millennia? And if academic and religious institutions hesitate to openly discuss these issues, what does this say about the very nature of truth? In the midst of this search, the accounts of the Nephilim become a metaphor for the duality of human existence. They represent not only ambition and greatness, but also the fall and loss. The idea that once glorious beings may have faced decay is an echo of the human condition. What happens when the connection with the divine is broken? The narrative of Genesis 6:4 presents us with a glimpse of that fall, suggesting that the Nephilim were not only beings of power, but also witnesses to a wisdom that faded away. As we delve deeper into this mystery, the idea that the Nephilim may have been the architects of their own ruins gains strength. If their fall was, in fact, a loss of connection with divine knowledge, what could this mean for us today? Are we, in some way, following in the footsteps of that decay? This reflection leads us to a space of introspection. What do we truly understand about the forces that shape our reality? In this context, the silence of the institutions is not just a defense of the status quo, but also an invitation for us, as explorers of the truth, to delve into the shadows. What is hidden in the lines of history? The answer may lie in new methods of investigation at the intersection of different disciplines, where archaeology, theology, and even astrophysics meet to explore the possibilities of a more expansive narrative. Thus, the story of the Nephilim reveals itself not only as an account of antiquity, but as a mirror of our own uncertainties and hopes. As we continue our journey, the question persists. What truths remain hidden in the shadows, waiting to be discovered? What else does history have to teach us about the Nephilim and about ourselves? This search for knowledge and understanding leads us to an abyss of questions. How did humanity deal with the idea of beings who may have crossed the boundaries of the real and the supernatural? What can we learn from the mistakes and successes of past civilizations? As the boundaries between myth and reality fade, we are challenged to reevaluate what we consider truth. The journey through the Nephilim is, ultimately, a journey toward ourselves, a search for meaning in a world that often seems chaotic and confusing. And so we move forward, intrigued and amazed, ready to unveil more mysteries, in search of answers that, who knows, might bring us closer to a greater truth. While the stars shine in the night sky, the quest for understanding the shadows that inhabit our past continues, pushing us forward on our journey for wisdom. The winds of history blow gently, carrying the echoes of distant conversations between men and gods. As we delve even deeper into this labyrinth of mysteries, a new element emerges, the figure of the sage. This character, often overshadowed by the grandeur of the Nephilim, is, in reality, the guardian of ancient knowledge, the one who keeps alive the flame of wisdom that flows between the human and the divine. The sages, in their various forms, are representatives of hidden traditions, which often intertwine with the figures of the Nephilim, as if They were shadows, dancing under the light of an unexplored truth. Let us consider for a moment the existence of the sages in ancient civilizations. They were seen as intermediaries, those who received divine revelations and were entrusted with transmitting that knowledge to the people. Were they the true architects behind the marvels that the Nephilim supposedly helped build, or were they mere transmitters of a legacy that did not belong to them? This question challenges logic and leads us to reflect on the role of knowledge in the construction of civilization. Through the sages, the connection between the Nephilim and the sacred monuments is strengthened, as they are the voices that resonate amidst the silence of the stones. As we follow this clue, a crucial revelation presents itself: the possibility that the sages may have been allies of the Nephilim or even their descendants. In ancient texts, we find references to beings who possessed a vast and mysterious knowledge that defied common understanding. These sages, endowed with extraordinary abilities, may have been responsible for transmitting the construction techniques and occult sciences that allowed the creation of monumental structures. This new perspective not only illuminates the relationship between the Nephilim and the architects, but also suggests that knowledge is a precious commodity, often forgotten or misinterpreted. The Temple of Baalbek, with its immense sculpted stones and majestic columns, is one of the best examples of this intersection between sages and Nephilim. The stories circulating about the place speak of a group of builders who, under the guidance of celestial beings, erected structures that defy gravity and logic. Were the sages the true engineers behind these works, operating in harmony with the Nephilim? This possibility leads us to a profound reflection. What is needed for a monumental project like Baalbek to be carried out? It is not just a question of physical strength or tools, but of a shared vision, of a purpose that transcends human existence itself. The analysis of the clay tablets of Mesopotamia reveals a deep respect for the sages and their contributions. In these records, we find mentions of teachings on astronomy, mathematics, and architecture, all attributed to beings who descended from the heavens. These writings are not mere mythical narratives. They are testimonies of an era when knowledge and spirituality were intertwined. The lament for this lost knowledge resonates in the pages of history, like a call for us to re-explore the forgotten truths that shaped our civilization. However, the relationship between the sages, the Nephilim, and the sacred monuments is not without ambivalence. The fall of the Nephilim, as described in Genesis to Chronos, raises questions about the nature of knowledge. Did the wisdom they possessed become a burden, leading them to decay? What can be learned from this legacy of light and shadow? The reflection leads us to a space of introspection, where the search for knowledge is both an act of courage and a responsibility. As we delve deeper into this narrative, the idea that the Nephilim and the sages coexisted in a universe of interdependence becomes increasingly palpable. The structures we erect, the truths we seek, and the questions we ask today might well reflect the ancestral struggle between light and darkness. We are, in a way, repeating history, striving to find a balance between what we know and what is still hidden in the shadows. In this context, the silence of the institutions and the reluctance to explore the deeper truths about the Nephilim and the sages can be seen as a defense of the status quo. It is an invitation for us to become intrepid explorers, ready to challenge conventional narratives and delve into the shadows of history. Thus, the search for knowledge transforms into an act of rebellion, a journey toward the truth that awaits us. It is crucial that we allow ourselves to question established narratives and explore the intersections between the human and the divine. What is hidden between the lines of history? How did the sages and the Nephilim shape the civilizations we know? These questions become not only an intellectual exercise, but a call to action. As we continue to explore this rich tapestry of myths and realities, we are invited to re-examine our own relationship with the knowledge and wisdom that, for so long, remained in the shadows. At this point in the narrative, the idea that knowledge is both a power and a responsibility stands out. What do we learn from the sages and the Nephilim? How can we apply these lessons in our contemporary lives? The journey is just beginning, and the answers might well be more complex than we imagine. Could it be that by immersing ourselves deeper, we will find the fragments of an ancient wisdom that still resonate in the structures we build and the stories we tell? Thus, we will move forward, ready to explore the mysteries that remain hidden in the shadows as we seek the truth about the Nephilim and the connection between the forces that shape our reality. The echoes of ancient wisdom reverberate with greater intensity as we delve into the connection between the sages and the Nephilim. With every stone we study, every text we analyze, we are led to reflect not only on the grandeur of the monuments, but also on the profound meaning they carry, as if they were silent witnesses to a time when knowledge and spirituality were one. The tablets of Mesopotamia, for example, are not only historical records, but fragments of a greater narrative unfolding before us, revealing a complexity that transcends modern logic. In this context, a new character emerges, the scribe. This figure, often relegated to a secondary role in narratives, plays a crucial part in the preservation of ancient knowledge. The scribes were the messengers of wisdom, responsible for transcribing and disseminating the information acquired through the sages. In their hands, words became power, and history, a legacy that could shape generations. Like the sages, the scribes were seen as intermediaries between the human and the divine, and their relationship with the Nephilim becomes another question mark in our search for answers. However, the influence of the scribes is not limited to mere transcriptions. Through them, the essence of the sages' teachings could be reinterpreted, adapted, and even distorted, depending on the interests of whoever controlled the power. These adaptations, which often altered the original meaning, raise the question, to what extent do the texts we have today reflect the truth of past events? The possibility of intentional manipulation leads us to face the narrative of Genesis 6:4 with a critical eye. What exactly did the ancients try to convey about the Nephilim? Would they have wanted to warn us about the dangerous knowledge being shared between the sages and the Nephilim? As these questions accumulate, it is inevitable that we consider the implications the fall of the Nephilim had on the legacy of knowledge. When we examine the description of their fall in Genesis, we note that it is not just an isolated event, but a catastrophe that reverberated in the civilizations that followed. What might have been an exchange of knowledge and skills turned into a burden, a warning about the destructive power that knowledge can carry when misused. This tragic outcome invites us to rethink the nature of knowledge and its relationship with morality. In this sense, the figure of the sage becomes even more intriguing. If they were, in fact, descendants of the Nephilim or their allies, was the knowledge they possessed a blessing or a curse? This duality, which permeates the narrative of the Nephilim, is also reflected in the trajectory of the sages and the scribes. They are not just bearers of wisdom, but also guardians of a knowledge that can be both illuminating and highly dangerous. The Temple of Baalbek, with its monumental structures, is a testament to this complexity. It can be seen as a symbol of the union between the divine and the human, but also as a reminder of the consequences that can arise from hubris. Meanwhile, the ruins of Baalbek remain an enigma, defying conventional explanations about the ancients' capacity to perform such work. The precision in construction, the choice of stones weighing several tons, and the methods of transportation and assembly remain unanswered questions. Could it be possible that the sages, with the guidance of the Nephilim, possessed knowledge that surpassed our modern understanding? What do ancient texts tell us about the methods they used? Every fragment of information is a key that can open new doors to understanding what truly happened in that era. In the midst of these reflections, a new enigma emerges: the relationship between astronomy and the construction of monuments. Mentions of astrological teachings in the tablets of Mesopotamia force us to consider the possibility that the sages and the Nephilim were engaged in a colossal project that united heaven and earth. This connection between the stars and the structures they erected may have been a way to ensure that knowledge and spirituality were interconnected, creating a legacy that would withstand the test of time. However, in exploring this intersection, we must be careful with conclusions. The ambiguity between what is sacred and what is scientific becomes increasingly evident. It is here that the narrative takes us to a space of contemplation, where the search for answers must be balanced with the acceptance of the unknown. Ancient wisdom might well guide us, but we must have the humility to recognize that not all questions have definitive answers. At the same time that we seek to unveil the mysteries of the Nephilim, it is fundamental that we also honor the complexity of the knowledge they represented. As we continue our journey, the intersection between the sages, the Nephilim, and the great works of humanity provides us with a unique opportunity to reevaluate the history that has been presented to us. What we know and what we presume may be just the tip of the iceberg. The legacy of the Nephilim and the sages is not just a tale of greatness. It is an invitation for each of us to question what we truly know about our own history and the role of knowledge in shaping our future. In this labyrinth of revelations, the search for truth becomes a path full of challenges, but also of infinite possibilities. As we approach the next phases of this narrative, we must ask ourselves what more can be revealed about the relationship between the sages and the Nephilim, and, perhaps most importantly, what lessons can we draw from their legacy, which still resonate in the walls of temples and the pages of ancient texts. As the night advances, the mystery of the Nephilim grows denser, like a fog embracing the ancient mountains. The connection between the sages and the scribes intensifies, revealing a vital bond that transcends time and space. The scribes, with their bamboo reeds and clay tablets, were not mere shadows. They were architects of knowledge, shaping the narratives that reached us across millennia. When we think about the complexity of the information they transcribed, we begin to understand that it was not just about recording events, but about interpreting and shaping history. A fascinating aspect of this dynamic is how the scribes may have influenced the narrative about the Nephilim. Imagine a solitary scribe in a room lit by an oil lamp, their agile hands dancing over the tablets, pondering the implications of what they write. The pressure to shape history according to the needs of their patron or the society they lived in may have led to a careful selection of narratives. What then would be the truth? And what would be a convenient version of the truth? This question becomes increasingly pertinent as we delve into the traditions surrounding the figure of the Nephilim. A new layer of complexity emerges when we consider the inscriptions at Baalbek. The monumental stones that form the temple impress not only by their size, but also by the precision of their cut and the intricate fit between them. Which leads us to ask what ancient knowledge was available to the sages that could explain such a feat. Were they the possessors of astronomical secrets, engineering knowledge that would transcend the technical capacity of later civilizations? Ancient texts, now fragmented, may contain hidden clues that we still cannot fully decipher. Meanwhile, a new revelation begins to emerge: the connection between the Nephilim and astronomy. The relationship between celestial cycles and the construction of monuments is not merely symbolic. Many of the great temples, such as those at Baalbek and others around the world, were built in alignments that reflect the position of the stars and planets. Could this be a direct legacy of the Nephilim, who seemingly brought with them knowledge about the cosmos and its impact on Earth? This possibility leads us to re-examine not only the history of the Nephilim, but also the way humanity has always sought to understand its place in the universe. The sages, perhaps, acted as intermediaries between that celestial knowledge and humanity. They may have interpreted the signs of the sky and translated them into practices that shaped the daily lives of civilizations. The construction of monuments was not just a matter of worship, but also of alignment with astronomical events, an attempt to ensure that the blessings of the cosmos fell upon the earth. How did this practice develop over time, and how might the scribes, guardians of knowledge, have distorted or preserved these practices in their writings? Paradoxically, the search for understanding leads us to a deeper dilemma. The knowledge that was transmitted may have been both a blessing and a curse. If the Nephilim truly shared advanced knowledge, what could have happened when those teachings fell into the wrong hands? What began as a quest for excellence and understanding may have turned into a path toward destruction as the corruption of knowledge spread. Thus, the fall of the Nephilim, far from being just an isolated event, may have triggered a wave of consequences that reverberated through the centuries, affecting entire civilizations. As we reflect on this duality, the figure of the scribes becomes even more intriguing. They were not just transcribers. They were the heralds of a knowledge that could be interpreted in various ways. In a world where words have power, the selection and presentation of what is considered truth become crucial. The manipulation of sacred texts and the reinterpretation of stories are not just matters of academic interest, but have profound implications for how we understand our history and identity. In the midst of this reflection, the question that resonates is, to what extent do the texts we have today reflect the truth of past events? Could it be that the versions that reached us were shaped by interests and agendas that distort reality? What did the sages and scribes truly know about the Nephilim and the knowledge they possessed? As this question becomes increasingly urgent, we ask ourselves, are we ready to face the truths that may be hidden beneath the layers of history that have been presented to us? While these questions accumulate, the Temple of Baalbek remains a symbol of what can be achieved through wisdom and knowledge, but it also serves as a somber reminder of the dangers that accompany the pursuit of power. The physical evidence that still remains speaks of an era when humanity ventured to touch the divine, but at what cost? The tension between ambition and morality is palpable, and every new fragment of information we find brings us closer to a truth that can be both illuminating and terrifying. We are, therefore, at a crucial point in our narrative. As we explore the depth of the interactions between sages, scribes, and Nephilim, we glimpse not only what was, but also what may still be. Knowledge, once acquired, can never be completely forgotten, and the lessons of the past can resurface in unexpected ways. By delving further into this complex plot, new revelations await, ready to challenge everything we know about the relationship between humanity and divinity. The dense atmosphere of the night intensifies, and the questions floating in the air seem to resonate in the invisible walls of time. The sages, in their tireless pursuit of knowledge, not only recorded events, but also became the interpreters of truths that transcend generations. The relationship between the sages and the Nephilim now leads us to a new understanding of how beliefs and spiritual practices intertwine with ancestral wisdom. As we contemplate the inscriptions at Baalbek, the magnificence of these structures prompts us to question, what do we truly know about the purpose and intention behind their construction? It is not just a display of power or worship, but the search for a deeper connection with cosmic forces. The sages, in deciphering the whispers of the stars, may have designed these grandiose works as ways to communicate with celestial beings, perhaps even with the Nephilim themselves who, according to the stories, descended to our world. This idea of communication is not new. Many ancient texts speak of worship practices and rituals that sought to invoke the presence of the gods. The sages, in shaping the narratives, may have seen themselves in the position of mediators between humans and the beings that inhabited the upper realms. But what happened when the line between the sacred and the profane became tenuous? The corruption of knowledge seems to have infiltrated the traditions, distorting the messages that should have been pure. A new revelation forms as we explore the legends surrounding megalithic constructions, the role of the Nephilim as possible engineers, of a knowledge that not only shaped architecture but also the very spirituality of civilizations. What was thought of as simple construction may, in reality, be an astronomical map, a guide to understanding natural cycles and celestial influences on Earth. This leads us to a new inquiry. Was the construction of the temples a reflection of the Nephilim's wisdom, or just a distorted echo of a lost knowledge? In this context, we begin to see the figure of the sages in a new light. They were not just guardians, but also innovators, capable of reinterpreting and adapting ancient knowledge to the needs of their time. But did this adaptation preserve the essence of what was originally taught? Or could it be that, in the pursuit of relevance and acceptance, they fell into the trap of simplification, resulting in a fragmented legacy? As we reflect on these dilemmas, the connection between the sages and the Nephilim becomes a central theme. What is at stake is more than the simple narrative of beings who walked among us. It is a meditation on the nature of knowledge and how it shapes our lives. The texts that survived, filled with varied interpretations, show us that truths can be malleable depending on who tells them. And what if the Nephilim brought with them not only technical skills but also a form of wisdom that, if misinterpreted, could lead to disastrous consequences? The night advances, and the figure of the scribe becomes more complex. He is an archetype of duality, the transmitter of knowledge that can illuminate or obscure. Every word he writes can be a portal to understanding or a veil that conceals the truth. Could it be that the scribes, at some point, had to choose between recording history as it was or shaping it to suit the interests of those who held power? This question becomes increasingly relevant as we excavate the layers of evidence that connect the Nephilim, astronomy, and humanity itself. The intersection between the stars and the temples is not just a matter of alignment. It is a symbol of the eternal search for meaning. What can we learn from the arrangement of the temples in relation to the celestial bodies? When we look at the sky, what are we truly seeking? The sages, by aligning their constructions with the cosmos, may have been trying to capture the essence of a knowledge that otherwise would remain lost in the shadows of history. As the conversation intensifies, we are forced to confront the possibility that the legacy of the Nephilim and their teachings are not just ancient tales, but warnings about what happens when knowledge is misused. What began as a search for the truth transformed into an enigma that haunts humanity. The rise and fall of these beings can be seen as a repeating cycle dice, a pattern reflected in our own history. And so, as the night deepens, the tension mounts. The questions accumulate like the stars in the sky. What do we know about the Nephilim? What truly happened to them? And, most importantly, what can we learn from their stories? Not only about the past, but also about the future. The journey is far from over. On the contrary, it is just beginning. As we move forward, it is crucial that we not only listen to the words of the sages and the scribes, but also seek to understand the lines between them, the shadows that dance between what is known and what remains hidden. Every revelation brings us a little closer to the truth, but also plunges us deeper into the mystery. The quest for understanding the Nephilim and their legacy is, in reality, a quest for ourselves, a path that we are all destined to travel. And as the night advances, we are invited to continue our investigation, not only as spectators, but as active participants. In this ancestral narrative that links us to a forgotten past and an uncertain future, the question persists: what are we willing to discover about ourselves by exploring the stories of the giants who came before? The night grows thick, and an almost palpable silence envelops the scene. The North Temple, with its imposing columns, seems to vibrate under the starlight. The sages, gathered in a circle, fervently discuss the implications of their recent discoveries. Amidst this atmosphere charged with tension and expectation, one of the scribes steps forward, holding an ancient tablet whose inscriptions seem to glow under the moonlight. With a deliberate gesture, he places it on a smooth surface, allowing everyone to contemplate the enigmatic symbols found there. These marks, he begins, his voice gently resonating among his colleagues, are not mere annotations. They are records of something much deeper. A murmur of agreement runs through the group as the sages lean forward, anxious to hear more. The scribe continues, "Here, there is talk of a celestial connection, a relationship that seems to point to the Nephilim as intermediaries between humans and the gods. The words about the Nephilim as mediators resonate in the hearts of the group. If they, in fact, possessed the knowledge that could illuminate humanity, what would be the cost of this understanding?" The implications seem heavy, as if the air around them had grown denser. One of the sages, serene in appearance, but with eyes shining with curiosity, questions, "But what does this mean for us? Are we ready to deal with the truth that these revelations bring us?" The question hangs in the air, and a contemplative silence settles. The shadows cast by the torches dance on the temple walls, as if they, too, were awaiting an answer. The scribe speaks again. "Perhaps we should consider that what we know about the Nephilim is only the surface of an iceberg. They may have been both teachers and warnings, a paradox that we must explore with caution." While the discussions continue, a young sage with a keen gaze raises a new possibility. What if the Nephilim were not just mythical figures? What if they were, in reality, the bearers of a knowledge that could be misinterpreted by generations? What was thought to be wisdom may have become a burden. The idea that this knowledge could be both a blessing and a curse resonates among those present, like a warning that endures through time. The atmosphere transforms, and concern begins to seep into the conversations. What would happen if this knowledge fell into the wrong hands? The scribe, sensing the unease in the environment, speaks firmly. "We need to understand that knowledge is power, but also responsibility. If the Nephilim truly left us a legacy, it is up to us to decide how to use it." At that moment, one of the oldest sages, with a hoarse voice, adds, "History is full of cycles, and we have already seen what happens when knowledge is misused. The deluge was not just a catastrophe, but an attempt to cleanse what had become corrupt. Therefore, we need to be vigilant." The conversation becomes increasingly intense as the sages argue about the need for a new code of ethics, a guide to help them navigate this new territory of discoveries. "We must create a pact among ourselves," suggests the young sage, "a commitment that any new knowledge will be treated with respect and responsibility. We must not repeat the errors of the past." Facing the proposal, the sages begin to discuss the details of that pact, each contributing their own experiences and concerns. The idea that the Nephilim may have left an inheritance of such potential and danger permeates their discussions, forming a web of intentions and hopes. With every new idea, the tension seems to grow, as if history itself were at stake. As the hours pass and the moon moves across the sky, a new thought forms in the scribe's mind. What if, besides the Nephilim, there are other entities, other beings who observe us and wait? What else could we discover if we look not only at the stars, but also at the mysteries that have yet to be revealed? This thought causes a new silence, a reflective pause that seems to carry a profound weight. The gaze of every sage turns to the sky, where the constellations seem to tell stories that have yet to be heard. "The answers we seek may be closer than we think," murmurs one of them, his voice almost inaudible. With this new perspective, the sages decide that they can no longer remain at the mercy of interpretation. It is time to become the authors of their own stories. Thus, as the first rays of dawn begin to touch the horizon, they commit to investigating more deeply, to questioning and exploring. The pact signed that night is not just about knowledge, but about the incessant pursuit of truth. The atmosphere that was once charged with tension now seems to glow with a new hope. The sages, illuminated by determination and courage, raise their cups in a toast to the future, ready to face the challenges that will come. And as the light of day begins to break the darkness, the certainty that the journey is just beginning settles in their hearts. In this new dawn, the story of the Nephilim and their complex legacy will undoubtedly become the common thread of many future narratives. What seemed to be a mere tale is now a deeper search for answers, a path that will lead them to explorations that go beyond the boundaries of human understanding. In every stone, in every inscription, in every star, the promise of discovery awaits those who have the courage to look beyond the visible. And so, in this new light, the truth begins to be drawn, one stroke at a time, like a mural slowly revealing itself, promising eternal reflections on what it means to be human in a universe full of mysteries. The sages, now deeply immersed in discussions about the true nature of the Nephilim, begin to perceive that the knowledge they seek is not merely academic, but has implications that resonate through time. like an ancestral whisper begging to be heard. The scribe, with his tablet illuminated by the moonlight, speaks again, his expression firm but loaded with a weight that everyone feels. If the Nephilim were truly mediators between the gods and humanity, we must consider the possibility that they did not disappear, but are in some way still present among us today. This assertion causes a wave of uneasy murmurs among those present. One of the oldest sages, with a sharp and penetrating gaze, asks, "But how can we affirm that? What would be the evidence for such a claim? Shouldn't we be cautious in stating that these beings still exert influence in our lives?" The concern in his voice is palpable, reflecting a dilemma that resonates in the room, the thin line between belief and evidence. "What if we are living in a cycle?" suggests the young sage, her voice now more confident. "Cycles that repeat, where the wisdom of the Nephilim is forgotten, only to resurface again in times of crisis? Those who believe that knowledge is a gift may, in reality, be receiving a burden." The idea of recurring cycles, of knowledge eroding and resurfacing, prompts reflection among the sages. The scribe observes, perceiving the frustration in their gazes, as if they were seeking a truth that always escapes their grasp. "Perhaps the answers are hidden in the stories we tell," he suggests, his voice soft but firm. "We need to explore the narratives that shaped our understanding of the world. The stories of the Nephilim are not just accounts of a distant past. They can be keys that open doors to understanding the present." The sages, now more attentive, begin to consider the possibility that the stories they have studied and discussed are not just legends, but lessons about the human condition, about power and its consequences. One of the sages, with a skeptical look, crosses his arms, challenging the idea. "But what about the myths that surround us? If the Nephilim were, in fact, beings who descended from the heavens, how can we reconcile that with our current reality? What have we seen in our society? What do these cycles truly mean to us?" The tension in the room increases. The questions that arise are not just intellectual. They touch the deepest fibers of belief and fear. "We need to remember that knowledge is a mirror," replies the young sage, her voice now firm and determined. "It reflects not only the truth, but also our flaws. If the legacy of the Nephilim is knowledge entrusted to us, it is up to us to decide how to use it. We must be the guardians of that legacy." Her affirmation resonates in the silence, like an echo reverberating through the temple walls. In this dense atmosphere, the scribe perceives that the solution to the dilemmas faced will not be easy. The pact we discussed must include not only responsibility, but also vigilance. We need to be alert so as not to repeat the errors of the past, but we must also be willing to listen to what these ancient accounts have to teach us. The sages nod, and the idea of a pact becomes an anchor in the midst of the storm of uncertainties. "We must seek the truth, even if it is uncomfortable. We need to be willing to face what the Nephilim represent, not just as mythical figures, but as symbols of a human condition that still persists. What we learn from them can guide us in building a wiser future," adds a younger sage, his enthusiasm palpable in the room. He stands up, gesturing with fervor as if his words could shape their destiny. "What if, besides the Nephilim, there are other entities, other beings who observe us?" The scribe speaks again, his words resonating in the room. "What do we know about these entities? What are their intentions? We need to be aware that our understanding is limited, but that doesn't prevent us from questioning and investigating." The tension in the room intensifies. A sage stands up, his face illuminated by the soft light of the torches. "We are about to enter unknown territory, and that requires courage from us. We may encounter truths that we are not ready to face." His gaze is serious, reflecting the gravity of the conversation. "But we cannot allow fear to paralyze us. We need to explore and question. If the Nephilim left a legacy, we must discover what it is and how that can help us better understand our place in the world." As the discussion progresses, the scribe observes that the atmosphere transforms from uncertainty to determination. The voices of the sages intertwine in a chorus of resolutions, each bringing their own experiences and wisdom to the conversation. A pact begins to form, not only among them, but with the very legacy of the Nephilim. The knowledge they seek is not just an intellectual curiosity, but a key to unveiling mysteries that can shape the future of humanity. The night advances, and the North Temple becomes a beacon of hope and determination. The sages, together, decide that, regardless of the difficulties they may face, they are ready to embrace the legacy that the Nephilim left, to learn from it, and, who knows, find a path that leads them to a new era of wisdom. The challenge now is not just to understand the past, but to use it to build a clearer and more enlightened future, where knowledge is a guide, not a curse. As the Stars shine brightly in the sky. A new understanding forms among the sages. The connection between the Nephilim and humanity is a journey that never ends, and their search for truth is, in essence, a search for themselves. The tension in the room was mounting, an air of expectation floating as the sages pondered the affirmations made. The scribe, sensing the need for clear direction, paused, looking at each of them. If the Nephilim truly left a legacy, we need to investigate that legacy more deeply. What did they teach us? What truths are hidden between the lines of our traditions? The young sage, always eager to explore new ideas, proposed a path. Perhaps we should examine the accounts of other cultures. If the Nephilim were, in fact, beings who crossed the boundaries of worlds, their stories may be intertwined in the narratives of distant civilizations. The eyes of the sages shone with the excitement of the possibility. The exchange of knowledge seemed like a bridge that would connect not only their ideas, but also the cultures that, in some way, shared the same essence. One of the oldest sages, however, countered, "But what about the accounts that fail to corroborate this idea? What to do with the contradictions in the stories? We will have to confront those uncomfortable truths, even if that leads us to dark places in our own narrative." "That is exactly what we must do," replied the young sage, her determination pulsing in her words. "We need to face the contradictions and, instead of avoiding them, use them as tools for understanding. If the Nephilim are a part of us, then they also carry our flaws, our fears, and our hopes. Knowledge is a burden and a gift, and it is up to us to decide how to use it." The scribe, seeking to broaden the discussion, raised a question about the nature of collective memory. If the Nephilim were indeed beings who crossed between the worlds, could it be possible that the memory of them still lives within us, in our traditions and beliefs? This question plunged the room into a new contemplative silence. What did it mean to carry such a heavy legacy? How could the memory of ancient beings influence the present? A younger sage, who had previously remained in the background, raised his hand with hesitation, but soon asserted himself. What if, besides collecting the stories, we also started to seek the truth within ourselves? What can we learn about ourselves by reflecting on these beings who, in some way, came before us? This idea of introspection made everyone turn toward him, intrigued by the new perspective. Perhaps the path to understanding the Nephilim is not just in the stories we tell, but also in the ones we still live, pondered the scribe, the moonlight reflecting on his tablet. Perhaps their legacy is not just knowledge, but also a call to action. We need to ask ourselves, what kind of world are we building, and how does that relate to the warnings they left us? The young sage, with a glint in her eyes, quickly replied, "If we are truly living cycles, then perhaps we have the opportunity to break that cycle. If the Nephilim were, in fact, the guardians of knowledge, perhaps we need to assume that responsibility ourselves. We need to be more than mere recipients of knowledge. We must be the bearers of that knowledge, and more importantly, of the values it represents." The sages nodded in agreement, the excitement generating a new dynamic in the room. The scribe, sensing the moment of clarity, offered the following reflection. "We can face this truth as a challenge. If the Nephilim indeed existed and shaped our civilization, what prevents us from shaping our own history now? What can we do to ensure that their legacy is used for a greater good?" Voices rose again, a current of ideas and assumptions forming as each one tried to contribute with a solution. The dialogue became increasingly fervent as they explored the possibilities of a new era of wisdom. The tension that was once palpable now transformed into a contagious energy, as if the room itself were vibrating with the intensity of their discussions. What if, throughout our journey, we find not only the vestiges of the Nephilim, but also the marks of other civilizations that, like us, sought to understand the world around them? Asked a sage, his voice resonating in the temple columns. What unites us is the incessant search for answers, and perhaps, if we look at the whole, we can manage to see the patterns that lead us to a deeper understanding. The scribe, impressed by the depth of the conversation, felt a new understanding beginning to form. Yes, it is the interconnection of diverse knowledge that can guide us toward a future where the legacy of the Nephilim is not just an echo of a distant past, but a light that illuminates the path ahead. We need, then, to unite our voices and hearts, not only as sages, but as human beings, seeking a knowledge that transcends our limitations. The room, now filled with fervor, prepared for a new phase of their understanding. They sought not only the knowledge of the Nephilim, but also what that meant for them, as individuals and as a community. The cycle, which once seemed like destiny, now became an opportunity, an invitation to transform the narrative and thus the very history of humanity. Let us go, then, not only to excavate what is buried, but also to cultivate what is alive within us. May our fears and hopes be the seeds of a new legacy, concluded the young sage. looking at the faces around her, now illuminated by the flame of discovery. The night was still young, and the search for knowledge, like the Nephilim themselves, continued to unfold before them. The room, now immersed in a mixture of expectation and apprehension, continued to pulsate with the energy of the discussion. The scribe, sensing the need to deepen the conversation, decided it was time to explore the roots of collective memory, and the influence the Nephilim might have on future generations. He turned to those present, his firm voice resonating against the temple walls. If the memory of the Nephilim lives in us, then perhaps we can unveil the fragments of their teachings through our own experiences. But how can we affirm that? What do we truly know about the nature of that legacy? The young sage, always eager for intellectual challenges, spoke with fervor. Perhaps we should start by looking at the oral traditions of other cultures. Accounts of giants and extraordinary beings are not exclusive to our narrative. In various civilizations, we find similar echoes. We could investigate whether those stories have common roots and what that says about our human condition. One of the oldest sages, with a contemplative look, pondered the implications of this approach. But what about the accounts that fail to corroborate this idea? We cannot ignore the contradictions that arise when trying to connect different cultures and their beliefs. This diversity of stories may, in reality, complicate our understanding. The atmosphere in the room grew denser as the sages debated the validity of narratives from different civilizations. The young sage, determined to make the dialogue more productive, responded, "We need to face the contradictions, and instead of avoiding them, use them as tools for understanding. If the Nephilim are a part of us, then they also carry our flaws, our fears, and our hopes." Murmurs of agreement resonated among the sages, while the scribe, interested in deepening the discussion, brought up a crucial point. If we are truly living cycles, as you suggested, could it be that the lessons the Nephilim left us are being repeated in our own history? Knowledge is a burden and a gift, and it is up to us to decide how to use it. The conversation began to flow like a river, with each sage contributing their ideas. Perhaps the path to understanding the Nephilim is not just in the stories we tell, said the scribe, but also in the ones we still live. What can we learn about ourselves by reflecting on these beings who, in some way, came before us? A younger sage, with an expression of discovery, stood up again. If the Nephilim carried knowledge, what does this responsibility mean for us? Perhaps we need to take an active stance in preserving that legacy, shaping our own stories and values. Exactly, replied the young sage, her gaze shining with the intensity of discovery. We need to be more than mere recipients of knowledge. We must be the bearers of that knowledge, and more importantly, of the values it represents. Through introspection, we can discover how the lessons of the past still resonate in our lives. The scribe nodded, appreciating the depth of the reflection. This search is not just about answers, but about the questions we are willing to ask. How could the memory of ancient beings influence the present? What did these significant figures teach us about the connection between the human and the divine? The sages looked at each other, understanding beginning to form collectively. Perhaps what we need to do now is look at our own behaviors and question. Are we repeating the errors of the past, or are we learning from them? If the legacy of the Nephilim is an invitation to action, what kind of actions should we take? The room filled with a meditative silence, each sage sinking into their own thoughts. Finally, one of the oldest sages, who had until then listened in silence, decided to share his vision. If the Nephilim were, in fact, mediators between the gods and humanity, we must consider how this mediation manifests in our current lives. What does it mean to be in harmony with the knowledge that has been bequeathed to us? How do we ensure that this wisdom is not lost amidst the distractions and confusions of the modern world? The scribe, absorbing the words of the oldest sage, concluded, "These are questions that do not have easy answers, but they force us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and about our history. If we are the heirs of such a powerful legacy, we need to act with the responsibility it demands. What can we do to ensure that the legacy of the Nephilim is used for a greater good?" Voices rose again, teeming with ideas, theories, and reflections. Each of the sages was aware that the true answer might lie in the interactions between them, in the connections they were forming at that moment. The conversation transformed into a vibrant dialogue, where every idea was a step toward a deeper understanding of the Nephilim's legacy and its impact on humanity. Even so, a shadow floated over the room. The uncomfortable truths that entered their minds could not be ignored. The determination to seek the truth amidst uncertainty became increasingly evident. What would they reveal about themselves by exploring the stories of the Nephilim? This was the question that hung in the air, ready to be unveiled in the chapters yet to come. With a deep sigh, the scribe knew that the journey was just beginning. The voices quieted, and the atmosphere, although charged with uncertainties, was also permeated by a renewed hope. It was a moment of inflection, where curiosity and courage intertwined, creating a path toward self-knowledge and, who knows, toward the true understanding of the Nephilim's legacy. The atmosphere in the room was almost palpable, an invisible thread uniting the minds of the sages as they contemplated the depths of the Nephilim's legacy. The scribe, perceiving that the discussion had grown heated, decided to focus attention on a more practical matter. If we are exploring the possibility that the lessons of the Nephilim are being repeated in our lives, we need to investigate concrete examples. What events in our recent history can be seen as reflections of these teachings? An older sage, with an expression of wisdom accumulated over the years, slowly raised his hand, as if every word he was about to pronounce were an echo of the voices of the past. History is full of cycles of rise and fall. Think of the great civilizations that emerged and disappeared. We could argue that, like the Nephilim, those societies were carried away by their own grandiosity and forgot the essential lessons that knowledge should provide. The young sage, always restless and challenging, did not dismiss the idea. Yes, but we'd need to go beyond civilizations. What about our own lives? How are we influenced by the decisions we make? We may be repeating patterns that lead us to similar falls. This comment made many sages reflect. Another sage, who had until then listened in silence, commented, "Perhaps what we need to do is a critical analysis of our own actions and values. What are we doing to avoid repeating the errors of the past? If the memory of the Nephilim is an invitation to action, we can use that memory as a guide for our choices." The conversation began to intensify, each bringing up their own experiences and reflections. "We need to map those cycles of behavior," suggested one of the younger sages. "If we can identify patterns in our history, we can prevent the errors of the Nephilim from repeating." The scribe nodded, his expression showing that he saw the importance of this approach. "Yes, but we must also consider the consequences of our actions. Every decision we make resonates in future generations. We need a conscious commitment to the legacy we want to create." At this moment, the young sage, like a flash of inspiration, paused intentionally before speaking. "What if we consider the role of spirituality in this context? The Nephilim were not just powerful beings. They also represented a connection between the human and the divine. How can we re-establish that connection in our daily lives?" Her words resonated in the room, leading the sages to a deeper reflection. The oldest sage, who had previously shared his vision, spoke again. "Spirituality can be a bridge to understanding that connection. If we consider the spiritual practices of various cultures, there may be a common teaching that connects with the legacy of the Nephilim. We need to investigate these ties to truly understand what we can learn." The young sage nodded her head. "Exactly. We need to examine how spiritual traditions address the concept of responsibility, the relationship with the sacred, and what it means to be human. If the Nephilim left us a message, it must be rooted in the spiritual practices that connect us to something greater." The scribe, observing the intensity of the conversation, decided it was time to record these ideas. He took his tablet and began to write. "What you propose, then, is that each of us perform a spiritual self-analysis, that we seek to understand how our values and actions are interconnected with our understanding of the Nephilim's legacy." The sages murmured in agreement, the idea resonating with each of them. "This should be part of our daily practice," said a sage with a determined look. "We cannot just discuss theories, we must live them. We need to create a space where we can share our discoveries and challenges with each other." The room began to vibrate with a new kind of energy, a sense of community and purpose. The young sage, feeling this change, proposed, "How about we form a circle of reflection? A space where we can meet regularly to discuss our experiences and learnings about how we are incorporating the Nephilim's legacy into our lives?" The scribe smiled, perceiving that the proposal was a way to give life to the knowledge they were trying to understand. "That is an excellent idea. Creating a space for exchange and reflection will be crucial so that we can not only understand, but also live the lessons that the Nephilim left us." With this new direction, the conversation evolved into a collective commitment, and where each sage felt part of something greater. Together, they began to project the first steps to implement that circle of reflection. In each meeting, we can share stories from our own lives, reflecting on how the choices we make today can resonate in the future. We can carry this knowledge to those who are not here and create a current of wisdom that extends beyond us, suggested the young sage, her contagious passion filling the space. As the night deepened and the stars shone brightly outside, the sages felt that the connection between them and the Nephilim was becoming clearer. It was not just about understanding a distant past, but about shaping a conscious present and a future filled with meaning. Each of them, by committing to act, recognized that the true learning and the legacy of the Nephilim were not only a responsibility, but a gift. The scribe concluded the discussion with a final reflection, his voice resonating with the gravity of the moment. If the Nephilim left us a legacy of knowledge, it is up to us to honor that gift, not as a burden, but as an opportunity for growth and transformation. And so, under the soft moonlight, the sages began to plan their circle of reflection, aware that the journey was just beginning. The search for understanding and truth would continue, not only in the pages of ancient texts, but in the lives they lived every day. On that night, the memory of the Nephilim was not just a distant echo, but a light illuminating the path ahead. The discussion in the room took a new turn, with energy flowing among the sages as if each of them were connected by an invisible thread of ancestral wisdom. The scribe, aware of the rising emotions, decided it was time to delve even deeper into the conversation. If we truly consider the Nephilim as a mirror of our actions and choices, what practical steps can we take to prevent their failures from repeating? His voice resonated against the temple walls, reverberating with a gravity that made those present reflect. One of the younger sages, with a look burning with determination, stood up and exclaimed, "We must begin with ourselves. If the Nephilim failed to maintain humility and connection with the divine, we need to question ourselves. Are we being humble in our spiritual practices? Is our pursuit of knowledge leading us away from what truly matters?" The room fell silent for a moment, as the young sage's words penetrated the minds of everyone present. A gray-haired sage, who had been listening intently, brought up a critical observation. "History seems to repeat itself because we often forget the essential. However, we must not only look to the Nephilim, we must consider the lessons of other civilizations. What can we learn from those who came before us? What were their errors? And most importantly, what were their virtues?" He paused, allowing the weight of the question to settle upon everyone. "Yes," agreed the young sage with a sparkle in her eyes. "For example, the Maya civilization had a profound understanding of the cycles of nature and life. And yet, they also faced their downfall. What can we learn from them about integrating knowledge and spirituality? How can we apply that in our time?" The scribe, watching how the conversation unfolded, began to take notes. The connection between knowledge and spirituality seems to be a recurring theme. If we are truly looking to avoid the errors of the Nephilim, perhaps we should investigate how other cultures maintained that connection over time. He looked at each of the sages, awaiting a response. An older sage, who had until then remained silent, finally spoke. "Spirituality is not just a practice, it is a way of life. We need to incorporate spirituality into all our actions, in our thoughts and in our daily interactions. The Nephilim, in their power and grandeur, disconnected from this vital aspect. We can learn from that, seeking a balance that keeps us centered." The conversation began to revolve around concrete examples of spiritual practices that could be integrated into daily life. One of the sages proposed, "How about we create a space for regular exchange, where we can discuss our experiences and reflections? A place where we can explore how our daily actions reflect our spiritual understanding?" "That is essential," said the young sage with enthusiasm. "Through exchange, we can learn from each other and grow together. We cannot allow knowledge to become a burden, but rather a tool for transformation." The scribe, excited by the new direction of the conversation, made a note about the creation of that exchange space. What if we also documented our learnings? That way, we could build a record that not only preserves our discoveries, but could also be a source of reference for future generations. The sages began to discuss the practical details of implementing this idea. How could they create that connection? What would be the ideal format for the meetings? Suggestions flowed freely, like a river finding its way among the stones. Suddenly, the young sage interrupted with a serious expression. "But we need to ensure that we don't become like the Nephilim. Our search for knowledge must not lead us away from humility. We need to remember that true wisdom comes not only from the accumulation of information, but from the ability to listen and learn from others." This reminder echoed a murmur of agreement among the sages. The atmosphere in the room, once dense with tension, was now permeated with hope and determination. The scribe, with a smile on his face, observed the transformation. May we always be vigilant about our actions and choices. May the legacy of the Nephilim serve us not as a warning to fear, but as a guide for conscious action. As the discussion progressed, each sage began to share their own spiritual experiences, revealing moments when their journey led them to question their own decisions. It was a collective recognition that they were all in some way connected to the failures and triumphs of the past. Finally, looking around the room, the scribe perceived that the conversation had become not only a search for knowledge, but an exploration of the human essence. We may not have all the answers, But together, we can build a richer understanding of what it means to be human, learning from what was and what we can still be. As the voices of the sages resonated through the temple, a new commitment was formed in the air, a pact of reflection, learning, and connection. The legacy of the Nephilim would not be forgotten, but transformed into a guiding light for future generations. An opportunity not only to preserve history, but to shape a future where knowledge and spirituality coexisted harmoniously. The night advanced, and with every word exchanged, the temple transformed into a sanctuary of wisdom, where the lessons of the ancients intertwined with the hopes of the present, creating a sacred space for the true evolution of the human spirit. The young sage, with the intensity of her convictions pulsing in her veins, watched the faces of her colleagues intently, perceiving the internal struggle each one faced. We must remember that history is a cycle, and that every action has its consequences, she said, her firm voice resonating against the temple walls. What we can learn from the Nephilim is that power, without due respect for spirituality, can lead to ruin. How can we, then, cultivate this relationship of respect and balance in our daily practices? An older sage, who had listened carefully, decided to intervene. We need a concrete example, something that can serve as a guide. If the Nephilim show us what not to do, what are the models we can follow? He looked at the young sage, waiting for her to offer a proposal. She hesitated for a moment, her ideas intertwining, and then replied, "We can look at traditions that honor nature's sake, like the ancient Druids who saw the earth as sacred and respected its cycles. They understood that spirituality is not limited to rituals, but is a way of life that permeates every action." Her passion was contagious, and many sages nodded in agreement. The scribe, sensing the growing energy in the room, noted this new perspective on his tablet. "It is true," he said, "but how can we effectively integrate this vision into our current lives? We need tangible practices that connect us with that ancestral wisdom." One of the younger sages intervened, with a gleam in his eyes. "What if we created rituals that celebrated that connection? We could have regular meetings where we shared our learnings about nature, about ourselves, and about our spirituality. That would allow us to cultivate a safe space for questioning and reflection." He looked at the group, seeking support. The young sage smiled, animated by the idea. "That is essential. Through exchange, we can learn from each other and grow together. We need to ensure that these meetings are not just a space for debate, but a place where we can experience and live spirituality in action." The sages began to discuss the practical details of implementing these meetings. What could be done to ensure that they didn't just become another space for empty talk? The conversation revolved around how they could make these encounters meaningful and transformative. "Perhaps we should include practices that connect us with the natural world," suggested a younger sage, "such as group walks, outdoor meditations, or even rituals of gratitude." The scribe, always attentive, noted the suggestions. "What if we documented these experiences? That way we could create a record that not only preserves our learnings, but could also serve as a reference for future generations." This idea resonated in the room, causing the sages' faces to light up. "Yes, that is fundamental," said one of the oldest sages. "We need to ensure that knowledge is not lost, that it doesn't turn to dust over time. By documenting our experiences, we are creating a legacy that can guide those who come after us." As the conversation continued, a sense of purpose began to fill the atmosphere. The scribe, sensing the intensity of the discussion, decided it was time to refocus the attention. But we also need to question ourselves. What are we willing to sacrifice to truly honor this connection? The Nephilim, in their pursuit of power, lost sight of what truly mattered. The young sage stood up again with a look of determination. "We must confront our own ambitions and egos. If we want to avoid the errors of the past, we need to be honest about our intentions. Our pursuit of knowledge must be accompanied by humility and compassion. Only then can we honor the teachings of the sages who came before us." The gray-haired sage, who had until then remained silent, finally spoke again. "History repeats itself because we often forget the essential. The lessons are here, in the ancient and in the present. We need to be attentive and prepared to listen." The scribe, inspired by the sage's words, felt that the conversation was heading toward a climax. What if, at the end of each meeting, we held a joint reflection, a moment when everyone could share what they learned, what they felt, and how they intend to apply that in their lives? This would ensure that everyone left the meeting more conscious and connected. The room fell silent for a moment, as everyone considered the depth of this proposal. "It is an important step," agreed the young sage, "but we need to ensure that it doesn't become a chore, but a ritual of valuing what we learned together." The energy in the room was palpable, and the conversation continued to flow like a river, each idea adding new layers to the collective understanding. The determination to avoid the errors of the past was solidifying into a real commitment, a genuine desire to evolve and create a future that respected ancestral wisdom. As the night advanced and the stars shone brightly in the sky, the sages were ready to take the next step. They became not only guardians of knowledge, but also catalysts for a new era of understanding and connection. The promise of a better future, founded on the lessons of the past, began to form before them like a new dawn on the horizon. And so, the discussion in the temple room transformed into a call to action, a collective movement that sought not only to avoid the errors of the Nephilim, but also to honor the memory of those who came before, building a legacy that would be passed down to future generations, like a beacon of hope and wisdom. The young sage, with the intensity of her convictions pulsing in her veins, watched the faces of her colleagues intently, perceiving the internal struggle each one faced. "We must remember that history is a cycle, and that every action has its consequences," she said, her firm voice resonating against the temple walls. "What we can learn from the Nephilim is that power, without due respect for spirituality, can lead to ruin. How can we, then, cultivate this relationship of respect and balance in our daily practices?" An older sage, who had listened carefully, decided to intervene. "We need a concrete example, something that can serve as a guide. If the Nephilim show us what not to do, what are the models we can follow?" He looked at the young sage, waiting for her to offer a proposal. She hesitated for a moment, her ideas intertwining, and then replied, "We can look at traditions that honor nature, like the ancient Druids who saw the earth as sacred and respected its cycles. They understood that spirituality is not limited to rituals, but is a way of life that permeates every action." Her passion was contagious, and many sages nodded in agreement. The scribe, sensing the growing energy in the room, noted this new perspective on his tablet. "It is true," he said, "but how can we effectively integrate this vision into our current lives? We need tangible practices that connect us with that ancestral wisdom." One of the younger sages intervened, with a gleam in his eyes. "What if we created rituals that celebrated that connection? We could have regular meetings where we shared our learnings about nature, about ourselves, and about our spirituality. That would allow us to cultivate a safe space for questioning and reflection." He looked at the group, seeking support. The young sage smiled, animated by the idea. "That is essential. Through exchange, we can learn from each other and grow together. We need to ensure that these meetings are not just a space for debate, but a place where we can experience and live spirituality in action." The sages began to discuss the practical details of implementing these meetings. What could be done to ensure that they didn't just become another space for empty talk? The conversation revolved around how they could make these encounters meaningful and transformative. "Perhaps we should include practices that connect us with the natural world," suggested a younger sage, such as group walks, outdoor meditations, or even rituals of gratitude. The scribe, always attentive, noted the suggestions. "What if we documented these experiences? That way, we could create a record that not only preserves our learnings, but could also serve as a reference for future generations." This idea resonated in the room, causing the sages' faces to light up. "Yes, that is fundamental," said one of the oldest sages. "We need to ensure that knowledge is not lost, that it doesn't turn to dust over time. By documenting our experiences, we are creating a legacy that can guide those who come after us." As the conversation continued, a sense of purpose began to fill the atmosphere. The scribe, sensing the intensity of the discussion, decided it was time to refocus the attention. But we also need to question ourselves. What are we willing to sacrifice to truly honor this connection? The Nephilim, in their pursuit of power, lost sight of what truly mattered. The young sage stood up again, with a look of determination. "We must confront our own ambitions and egos. If we want to avoid the errors of the past, we need to be honest about our intentions. Our pursuit of knowledge must be accompanied by humility and compassion. Only then can we honor the teachings of the sages who came before us." The gray-haired sage, who had until then remained silent, finally spoke again. "History repeats itself because we often forget the essential. The lessons are here, in the ancient and in the present. We need to be attentive and prepared to listen." The scribe, inspired by the sage's words, felt that the conversation was heading toward a climax. What if, at the end of each meeting, we held a joint reflection? A moment when everyone could share what they learned, what they felt, and how they intend to apply that in their lives. This would ensure that everyone left the meeting more conscious and connected. The room fell silent for a moment, as everyone considered the depth of this proposal. "It is an important step," agreed the young sage, "but we need to ensure that it doesn't become a chore, but a ritual of valuing what we learn together." The energy in the room was palpable, and the conversation continued to flow like a river, each idea adding new layers to the collective understanding. The determination to avoid the errors of the past was solidifying into a real commitment, a genuine desire to evolve and create a future that respected ancestral wisdom. As the night advanced and the stars shone brightly in the sky, the sages were ready to take the next step. They became not only guardians of knowledge, but also catalysts for a new era of understanding and connection. The promise of a better future, founded on the lessons of the past, began to form before them like a new dawn on the horizon. And so the discussion in the temple room transformed into a call to action, a collective movement that sought not only to avoid the errors of the Nephilim, but also to honor the memory of those who came before, building a legacy that would be passed down to future generations like a beacon of hope and wisdom. The young sage, with the intensity of her convictions pulsing in her veins, observed the faces of her colleagues intently, perceiving the internal struggle each one faced. We need to understand that true power resides not only in grandiose actions, but in the wisdom that guides those actions, she said, her voice resonating with a renewed certainty. The Nephilim, in their pursuit of domination, forgot the responsibility that comes with power. We need to learn from their failures and seek a path that leads us to harmony with the world around us. The sages, hearing her words, began to reflect on what it truly meant to honor the earth and its cycles. Perhaps the answer lies in reverencing nature, suggested an older sage, whose eyes shone with the light of understanding. If we look to the ancient Druids, they not only respected the earth, but considered it an extension of themselves. Their spirituality was intertwined with daily life, and that made them a wise and respected people. Yes, intervened another sage, we can learn from their practices. How about we start rituals that celebrate the seasons and natural cycles? Meetings where we honor the life around us and share our knowledge on how to live sustainably and spiritually? The scribe, always attentive, noted every idea. What if we documented these rituals? That way, we would create a legacy that not only preserves our learnings, but also serves as a guide for future generations. We need to ensure that what we learn is not lost to time, as happened with the Nephilim. The young sage nodded, perceiving the importance of the proposal. That is essential. By documenting our practices, we will not only be preserving wisdom, but also inspiring those who come after us. We need a record that shows how spirituality and nature can coexist in harmony. A younger sage raised his hand, his expression full of enthusiasm. What if we created a library of wisdom, a place where we can gather not only our experiences, but also the stories of other cultures that respect the earth? That way we could learn from them and discover new paths to cultivate that relationship of respect. That is a brilliant idea, said the young sage, her spirit lifting with the possibility. A library that is not just a physical space, but a center for learning and knowledge exchange. We could invite people from various traditions to share their practices and visions. The scribe, excited, began to sketch a plan. We can organize regular meetings where everyone brings their stories and practices. These moments of exchange will allow us to grow together and connect on a deeper level. The conversation flowed, and the sages began to outline the practical details of implementing these ideas. What could be done to ensure that these meetings didn't just become another space for empty talk? The conversation revolved around how they could make these encounters meaningful and transformative. Perhaps we should include practices that connect us with the natural world, suggested a younger sage, such as group walks, outdoor meditations, or even rituals of gratitude. And what about music? Asked a sage. Music has the power to unite people and uplift the spirit. We can invite musicians to play during our meetings, creating an atmosphere of celebration and reverence. Yes, music can be a bridge between us and the divine, agreed another sage. It can remind us of the beauty of life and connect us with the essence of what it means to be human. As the discussion unfolded, the energy in the room became palpable. The sages were uniting around a shared vision, and the young sage felt they were about to take a significant step toward a more conscious and respectful future. But we also need to question ourselves. What are we willing to sacrifice to truly honor this connection? The scribe, with his firm tone, brought the conversation back to the crucial point. The Nephilim, in their pursuit of power, lost sight of what truly mattered. We need to ensure that we don't make the same mistakes. The young sage, with renewed determination, stood up again. We must confront our own ambitions and egos. If we want to avoid the errors of the past, we need to be honest about our intentions. Our pursuit of knowledge must be accompanied by humility and compassion. Only then can we honor the teachings of the sages who came before us. A respectful silence settled as each sage pondered her words. The responsibility they felt was palpable, and the awareness that their actions could shape the future weighed on their shoulders. They were facing a unique opportunity, the opportunity to rewrite the narrative that had been lost in the dust of time. "May we be the guardians of this new era," said an older sage, his voice resonating with conviction. "May we cultivate the wisdom that has been given to us and use it to create a world where respect and spirituality are the foundation of our actions." With this, the sages joined in a circle, each placing their hands in the center, symbolizing the union of their intentions. "So be it," they said together in a single voice. And so, as the moon illuminated the North Temple, the sages began to trace the path of a new cycle, a cycle of learning, respect, and connection with the earth. They became not only scholars, but practitioners of a spirituality that honored life in all its forms, ensuring that the lessons of the Nephilim would never be forgotten. The night advanced, but the light of wisdom began to shine more intensely, promising a tomorrow where spirituality and respect for nature would be the keys to a more harmonious future. And looking at the stars, each sage felt that they were finally on the right path, a path that honored both the past and the future. Thus, the story of the Nephilim transformed into a lesson of hope and renewal, a reminder that true greatness resides not only in power, but in the wisdom that accompanies it,